Welcome to Country First's virtual training on how to register others to vote. My name is Dave. I'm the National Grassroots Director here at Country First. And our hope is that you're going to leave this training more equipped and more empowered to go out into your community and make a difference, volunteering for the causes that are moving you the most and helping to get everyone to take a part in our democracy. Now, before we get into the meat of our training, I want to explain a little bit more about why we're offering this and who Country First is. So January 6th was a dark day for our democracy, but since then the temperature has only continued to rise with political extremism, division, and polarization. And what we've been left with is a democracy that's on edge. So Congressman Adam Kinzinger, from the ashes of January 6th, formed Country First with one mission: to defend democracy. And today we bring together thousands in the reasonable majority to stand for truth, to mend divisions, and to defend our democracy. Now, one of the ways that you can live in this mission within your own community is by working to get others to take a part in our democracy and vote. Right? Voting is a privilege and it's a big part of defending our democracy. That's getting everyone to be able to just take part in our democracy. So to tell us a little bit more about how to do this, what to look like, best tips, practices, and advice, I am pleased to introduce and welcome a seasoned political operative with a wealth of experience at all levels of campaigns and politics and a treasured part of our Country First team, Andrew. Andrew, how you doing?
What an introduction. Thanks, Dave. I'm doing well. Happy to be here tonight. Happy to talk about all things voting and getting registered to vote. So thanks for having me. Thanks for setting this up.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, I think right out of the gate, why is registering other people so important?
I mean, as you were just saying, it's important that we get folks to participate in our democracy, right? And I think one of the most obvious ways to get folks to do that is through voting. Everyone loves talking about elections, especially presidential elections. This is a presidential election year. And so as we talk a lot about throughout the Country First movement, to advance, strengthen, better our democracy, that's not just a one-night job or one elections job. There's a lot of work that's going to be done leading up to November, but that's November 5th is election day. November 6th, there's still, decades worth of work that we can do to better the way that we think about politics, talk about politics, the way that we come together as a country. And so in a way, it's kind of like voting, how I conceptualize it, is kind of like that first step. And if, how are we going to get to talk to folks about electoral reforms, or how to get folks talking about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and why that affects them? Getting to that point in the conversation is challenging if folks don't feel connected to democracy, don't feel like they're participating and their vote matters. And so that's why, we encourage everyone that voting is that first step, and you can really get folks introduced to how democracy works and why they should be passionate about it through that.
For sure. I think there's no question about it that voting is so important, and getting other people to be able to take part in that process is just so vital to the preservation and defense of that process. And so I think naturally then that leads to the question of, can anyone register others to vote, right? How does that work, this idea of registering other people to vote?
Yeah, so I think it's important that how we think about registering other people to vote. We're guiding every person to get registered, right? Delivering that necessary information. I think folks firstly don't realize how easy it is, but then just because it's super easy doesn't mean that everyone does it. And so, firstly, this is a national movement, and folks on tonight's call or watching our recording might not know that, it's different. How to get registered to vote and how to vote there's different rules in every single state, and in some states, even by county. And so firstly, it's getting really known to all the rules. And most rules, I would say, require that folks register themselves. And so with these voter registration drives, voter registration parties, et cetera, and I know we'll get into more specifics, so before I get ahead of myself, I'll stop. But it's really knowing the rules and being prepared to kind of hold people's hands through the process, and being prepared to get help them get the information they need to vote. And in most cases, it's just an address and 5 minutes to fill out a form. But I'll stop there before I keep going and throw it back to you, Dave.
Yeah, I think that was such an important distinction that you made that I think it's really worth highlighting here, that it's not a conversation about how do we register other people to vote, that it's a conversation about how do we guide other people to register to vote. And I think that that was a really cool distinction for people to be thinking about. And so for this now conversation about how do I then guide other people to register to vote, what do I need? Right? Do I need specific skills? What materials do I need? Like, what should I have in order to do this?
Well, I mean, it's trying to get folks to take an action, and getting folks to take an action because, you know, I think that that doesn't need to require specific skill per se. But I would say that, firstly, it's do your research. If you go to vote.gov, vote.gov, that's a public resource that will teach you everything you need. You can type in your state, you can type in, and it'll show you, or your territory, and it'll show you all the rules that are required by your state. And again, it'll tell you very clearly, the easiest is getting folks registered to vote through using online. If you're getting someone to vote online, you can walk around with your phone wherever that you're allowed to do that and ask folks to register right then and there. Obviously, though, if it's a vote by mail, right, then it's that one's a bit more challenging. But that means that maybe most places where you have to vote by, or not vote by mail, but register by mail, then it's going to your local county's elections office and picking up those forms and then handing those forms out to people and helping them fill that out. Not necessarily are you writing everything, but you encouraging them, like, let's do that, and then you mailing that for them. I've seen that done, and folks giving permission, like, yes, let's seal this together. I will bring it to the elections, not necessarily the elections office, but to the mailbox. And so that's an example. And then, of course, if it's you have to register yourself in person at your local office, that does still exist in the 2020s. Then it's getting folks the form and then encouraging them. I mean, you can even drive them all the way to the office, depending on how serious you are and who this is. Obviously, I think that if these are your very close families, I think that's where people usually start. It's like, I'm going to get all my relatives, and then I'm going to get all my neighbors and those that are all my and all those in my community, and then working from there. And just remembering that be very realistic about your target audience. The same way, like folks are like, oh, I'm going to get a big auditorium, and then I'm going to buy really great food, get Chick-fil-A or something to host it, etc. And then, or not to host it, to cater it. And then it's just like, well, the same way that there's blood banks, there's community service projects like that. The same people that I think would show up to a food bank community service project and or a blood drive is similar to who would show up to a registration drive, right? That's asking people to meet you where you're at. And I mean, of course, those work to some degree, getting folks, like if you're doing this at your child's or nephew's, niece's school, and then trying to get targeting all the parents, right? Like that makes sense. Like, oh, as they're dropping off their students to school, get them to register to vote. But being very realistic, it's like, getting out in the community, maybe getting permission at your church to table with these forms or have an iPad. Getting out, if parents are very active in taking their kids to school in your community, it's maybe there's ways that you're passing these forms out or getting people to register to vote, or pull over at the end of the drop-off line, and then that's how you're doing it. So I'd say be creative, think about, be very realistic about the folks that may not yet be registered to vote. Again, I think it's a different kind. Here on this call, it's folks who care about voting, care about democracy, care about who's running for elected office. I'm not saying that folks that are not registered to vote don't care, but I think that it's different motivations, and there's a different working knowledge. And so it's thinking about really being prepared to meet people where they're at. within the communities that you're from and occupy.
Yeah, I think I really like how you worded that. When you think about what do you need to help register other people to vote, or as you worded earlier, guiding other people to register to vote. It's answering the question of how can I best meet people where they're at. And you started to touch on some of these things, and I think that I just want to double back and double click on them. What are some tips and some best practices to help meet people where they're at? I know you talked about being creative and being realistic. Are there any other tips that you would give?
I think that, this is a volunteer, ran movement, and there are volunteers from all over. And, the most effective ones that I have seen is folks that host their own like voter registration parties, come have some nachos or like do like a barbecue at my place, and let's get registered to vote together. Let me talk to you. Also, that's where you can go that extra mile when you're in a more, relatively intimate space where it's like, I put voter guides together where you can show people, who's running for office at every level, because it's, obviously everyone might know like, oh, there's people running for president, there's people running for senator, but it's also, who's running for your county executive. Those tend to be people who play a really major impact on your day-to-day life, etc. And so I would say also identifying other community organizations, like with an audience that maybe isn't all about maybe their mission of this organization necessarily isn't like civic related. But it's getting in front of an audience. So like, I think, we see very effective, obviously, senior homes or senior communities. Like, don't be afraid to do a 5 to 15 minute presentation there. Again, when I was talking about, I brought up like an example of if you go to a church or if you are part of your, your child's PTA, etc. It's where are there built-in audiences that you can have a major impact. We're seeing also a lot of folks, I think, in person of color communities. I think minority affinity groups are some of our biggest target demographics to increase in voter registration. And so it's thinking about, well, where do people convene, or what local businesses have high foot traffic, where a lot of folks there, right, might be interested in voting, or where you could stand for a few hours during the busiest hours of the day, with the approval, of the owner, right? And so that's something like where if that, the same way that you would get approval at your local market or grocery store from managements, the same way, like, think about small businesses that are popular in your community and being able to go there. So there's a lot of unique ways. It's really, that's a great way of, like, on a call like this and leveraging this broad network, going on our Facebook group. It's, let's strategize together. What are you comfortable with? Are you more comfortable leading a more intimate conversation with 5 to 30 people? Are you willing to open up your home? Or do you know of a communal space that you can access? Okay, now what's a way that you can amplify that invitation, right? So we just have to problem solve it together. But there's a lot of ways to be creative of meeting folks where they're at. And so it's really realizing what you're comfortable with. And, that these are obviously talking a lot about like in person, but there's all these digital operations too, right? Or virtual, right? We're having this national meeting right now. This recording is going to be sent out to about a few hundred folks that signed up for it. And I think that, one thing to think is we can help you lead your own Zoom meeting, and you can invite 10, 20, 30 of your favorite friends and teach them how to register to vote and walk them through the websites online. We can have all the links ready. You can send out emails to folks. I know some folks got permission from their employers and have sent it to their company-wide email listserv. So it's just depending on, on what you're, again, most comfortable with. There are virtual and in-person ways. And the last thing I'll say is it's really important that if you're going to lead an initiative related to voter registration, to keep it focused on that. Keep it focused on why does registering to vote to matter. I know I mentioned like, you can create local voter guides, but it's it gets sticky when you're when you're trying to influence, like, well, now that you're registered to vote, here's who you should vote for, right? I think that's a natural discussion that might happen, but I wouldn't dedicate an event or like an official convening towards that. I would first focus on getting folks registered to vote, and then maybe those conversations are something that happens another day, another time, in a different setting. But I think that's where, especially since nowadays, when talking about voting, has become something so personal to the individual. It's just thinking about leaving people space of, my focus here is to get you to take that first step in participating, and then getting them the information they need to make a educated decision, not necessarily an influenced decision right away. So yeah.
Yeah, I think something that you said that really had stuck out is at the end of the day, when you think about how we're registering other people to vote, or again, as you said earlier, guiding other people to register to vote, all you're doing is problem solving. And you're answering this question of how can you step out of your comfort zone to make the biggest impact that you can? How can you be creative, be innovative, and also be true to yourself to just have fun with it? Because at the end of the day, you're making a difference in your community. You're doing a great service to help defend this democracy. You're getting more people engaged in democracy. I mean, we want to defend democracy. We need more people realizing why our democracy is worth defending. And that starts with just participating in it. And you talked a lot about, creatively doing that. And so I think, what are some of you talked about like backyard barbecues or nacho parties and things, but what are some other creative ideas that you have seen to help get other people registered to vote that people could think about doing on their own, that it doesn't take a mass organization or some mass movement to do?
Definitely. I think the biggest thing is kind of what I was talking about, thinking about where can you just have an impact on 5 to 10 people. I mean, obviously, in anything that you do, it's like, if we all give $1, if we all get one pal to do it, then the whole world would be a better place. But it really is. It really does come back down to, I think even further than asking people what they believe politically, I think it's challenging, like, going up to someone that you're relatively close with and be like, are you registered to vote? Are you planning to vote? And I think that's something nowadays, with, pushing back against extremism, that's kind of the hope of the extremes, for folks to feel like, oh, politics, it's not really my thing. Oh, yeah, I don't really want to do the reading. I don't want to do the research. I don't, I'm not, yeah, no, I'm not really. And I think that's going to probably be most of the folks' responses. Folks are comfortable, saying politics isn't my thing. Folks are comfortable saying that I don't really pay attention. I don't want to, I don't have strong opinions on that. And it's become too common. And I think that yes, is this a time in American politics that voters, or prospective voters in this case, are apathetic and are not the most encouraged? Yes, that is a real thing we are up against as folks that care about democracy, as folks that want to make a difference. But in a way, that's where how these kind of conversations can help change that. It's about, well, it's important that you show up. It's important that you still get registered. It's okay if you choose not to cast your ballot, right? We have now to November to encourage people to get out and vote. But right now, tonight, we're talking about getting folks to register to vote. I think folks say, well, it's leading with, oh, it's okay if you don't want to, if you end up deciding not to turn in your ballot. But not being registered completely locks you out of the system, right? Like, why would you take away one of your rights or your opportunities? And in this country, it's not everyone's automatically registered to vote. So even though, we talk about, that's your power, it's your right as an American citizen, it's really important that some folks, to exercise that is encouraged. And so again, I really like the concept of meeting people where you're at, instead of spending a lot of time planning a really, swanky event and getting, everybody focusing all of your efforts on trying to get out there, unless you're a great event planner and you have a long list of people to invite to these events or people helping you. I think kind of like, where's the heavy foot traffic, where Girl Scouts are the Girl Scout cookie people are very strategic, right? They know how to find you and ask you if you want your annual order. And then you're like, I need to go to the gym. But the same way, it's like, okay, can you find a local gym? Can you find a local store, a local business owner that's going to give you approval? Go stand there for an hour, or a few hours during the most, high traffic times. And I think that is one of the most effective things that I've seen. Folks who love their dogs, like I know some folks will go, I've heard wild stories over the years, but like folks will go to their pet's groomer and so, yeah, just kind of think of your community, think again where you're most comfortable with, what's safe for you to do this, but where you think that you're going to come across the most people that, aren't registered to vote. And it's just, again, starting that conversation. Are you registered to vote? And why is that an important thing to exercise? And saying really focus on registration.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing your insights and your experiences. I think that from our conversation here, the biggest takeaway that I've seen is that you don't need a resume, right? You don't need to be a pro. You don't need to be a paid employee of some organization to make a difference and to register other people to vote, that anybody can do it. It's a question of, are you willing to be creative? Are you willing to go bold? And are you willing to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit to defend democracy? Because at the end of the day, registering others to vote is so important, because if we want to defend democracy, that's going to start with getting all of us to take part in it, to see how special it is and exercising our right to vote. So from all of us here at Country First, thank you for being a part of the movement. And we hope that you feel more equipped and empowered to get out there, putting your feet to the street for the sake of our democracy. Thank you so much.